Hey everybody, Matt here with Kreft Moto. Today, I'm going to show you how to install our new Centrifuge XL for the WP XPLOR PDS shock. The XPLOR PDS shock is found on 2017 and newer KTM XCWs and EXCs. Some required tools for today's job: we've got a dead blow hammer, a spanner wrench, a 1/2-inch breaker bar, a 1/2-inch torque wrench, a 1/2-inch ratcheting wrench, a 24mm socket, 17mm combination wrench, a center punch, a flathead screwdriver, 4 and 5mm Allen key, a punch, a set of digital calipers. We have a metric tape measure. We have our thread locker. We have a pin spanner. And finally, we have a strap wrench. Some additional items that you'll need is a drain bucket or pitcher for your shock fluid. Of course, some safety glasses. We're going to be using a propane torch today, and we have a sturdy bench vise. Before we tear down the shock, it's essential to count and record the clicker settings and also measure the compress length of the spring. What I'm going to do is take a flathead screwdriver. I'm going to start with low speed compression, and I'm going to open this circuit by turning it counterclockwise. We'll move on to the rebound. And then we'll finish by using our 17mm wrench to open up our high speed compression at the top of the shock. Next, I'll take my 4mm hex key and I'll loosen the preload collar locking ring. Now once that's loose, sometimes you can spin these by hand and take the tension off the spring. If yours is a little tough to turn, you can use the spanner wrench. Now with the preload off of the spring, we can lower this locking ring, and that's going to expose this snap ring. Now a lot of times you can just use your thumbs and peel it up off of the clevis. If that's giving you a little trouble, you can use a flathead screwdriver or a small pry bar. With that off, we can slide everything off this assembly and set it aside. Now with the spring off, we can use that same 4mm hex and we can release the nitrogen. Now it's important that when you're releasing this nitrogen, you only loosen until you hear a hissing sound. There's a lot of pressure in this canister, and we just want it to slowly release. Once that pressure's out, you can remove this and set this bleed plug aside. Now that we have the nitrogen out of the shock here, we're ready to remove the base valve. Now we're going to use our 24mm socket. We're going to break this loose. Now we can loosen this by hand. Sometimes it'll come out in 2 pieces, which is okay. We have the outer base valve cage, and inside we have the valve body. Sometimes you need to wiggle this to get it out and set that aside. Now we can carefully cycle the damper to get all remaining shock fluid out. Be sure to tip up your pitcher to catch everything as it comes out. All right. With that mostly drained, usually take a shop towel to catch any remaining fluid as it comes out. Now we can move on to removing the seal head dust cap. For this, I'll use my dead blow and my center punch. We have these drain holes, we have 4 of them on this dust cap. With the center punch, I'm going to come in at an angle. I'm going to strike it with my dead blow. Now with this up, we've exposed our seal head. We're going to want to push this down in order to get at our inner circlip. With that down, I'm going to use a flathead screwdriver to get just at the edge of the circlip. I'm going to remove that, set it aside. Now we're ready to pull this entire damper assembly out of the shock body. So on this XPLOR shock, you can see we have our seal head, our compression valve stack, our main piston, our rebound stack, and the XPLOR's secondary compression piston. We'll go ahead and set that aside. We're going to take this preload collar and we're going to thread it all the way off this shock body. We're going to go ahead and set that aside. Now that we have our preload collar removed, we can prepare to remove this canister, either using a pin spanner, or for us today, we're going to be using one of our specialty tools with the pins built in. Before I use this tool, I'm going to grab my torch and I'm going to apply heat around this joint where the canister threads into the shock housing. Now I'm going to take my tool, I'm going to make sure that it's secure within the pinholes of the canister. I'm going to grab my breaker bar and break it loose. I'm going to grab a shop towel, finish threading this off. I'm going to use my pick to remove the OEM O-ring. Now that that O-ring is removed, we're going to take our acetone and be sure to clean this area extremely well. We want it free of any oil, any remaining thread locker. So I'm going to take a shop towel, I'm going to take my acetone, I'm going to spray this acetone in here. You can use contact cleaner. Just ensure that the contact cleaner that you're using doesn't contain any added lubricants. While the acetone is out, I'm going to take a new, fresh, clean towel. I'm going to spray my acetone, and I'm going to take the centrifuge body, and I'm going to ensure that the threads are clean and also free of oil. With those clean, I'm going to take the new O-ring that comes in your Centrifuge XL kit, and I'm going to install it in the O-ring groove of the shock housing. Once I'm sure that's seated, and with the centrifuge body, no piston, no end cap, I'm going to take the thread locker and I'm just going to put a light ring around the top of these threads. Now with the thread locker on, I'm going to go ahead and thread this in. Once I start to meet a little bit of resistance, I'll ensure that my shock is securely fastened within the vise. I'm going to grab my strap wrench. Now, a torque spec on an item like this is hard to measure. Our point of fasten is going to be when you feel a hard stop. Now that we have our Centrifuge XL body securely fastened to the shock housing, we're going to take our quality grease, we're going to dab some on our finger, and just line the inside surface of the Centrifuge XL body. Next, we're going to take our internal floating piston, and we're also going to apply grease to the piston band as well as the O-ring. Now that we have our piston greased, it's vital that we have proper orientation before we install this in the canister. We're looking for the O-ring at the bottom, the piston band at the top, and if you look down to the top of the piston, you'll see the center threaded feature. Now, we can install this into the canister and just push it down until you clear the cap threads on the inner surface. Now that we have our piston installed, we're going to take our cap and we're going to thread it on. Don't worry about torque yet. We just want to temporarily thread this on. We're going to remove it again later on when we set the piston height. All right, now that we have our cap temporarily fastened, we're ready for reassembly. I'm going to start by taking our preload collar and I'm just going to thread it on. These are plastic. Just be sure that you thread it on carefully. You can strip them out extremely easily. I'm going to take my base valve that came out in 2 pieces. I'm going to reconnect until you feel the O-ring snap. I'm going to reinstall, get the thread started, and then move on to my 24mm socket. Now I'm just going to thread this in until I meet slight resistance, just like that. Then I'm going to move on to my torque wrench. The torque spec on this base valve is 18 Newton. I use my torque wrench, get a secure grip, and that's it. With that torqued, I'm going to fill the shock with fluid until just about an inch away from the top of the shock body. With fluid in, we're ready to reinstall the damper. I'm going to make sure that this piston is lubricated just with the shock fluid inside the body. I'm just going to gently slide it in. Once that's in, we can take our seal head and we can press it down just below the snap ring groove. Once that's in, I'm going to take my snap ring, I'm going to push it down until I hear an audible click. Once that's in, what I'll do is I'll slide this damper up. I'll give it a little bit of upward force just to ensure that that snap ring is properly seated. And before I tap in this dust cap, I'm just going to take a rag and I'm going to clean any excess oil around the seal head. Now with that clean, I'll take my dust cap, line it up, and with my dead blow, I'm just going to circle around it and tap it into place. Now with this whole assembly ready to go, we have fluid in the shock, we're ready for the bleeding process. Now that we have our nitrogen charged, we've ensured that it's at 10 bar or 146 psi. We're ready to reinstall the spring. So I'll start sliding on the hardware here, slide on the spring, and then just the preload collar so that we can install our locking ring and circlip. Now, just as we remove this with our thumbs, you just slide this on, click it into place, lift up on the spring to ensure that it's captured. We've compressed that spring. We've gone back to that original length that we took at the beginning of the build. We can take our 4mm Allen key and we can fasten or lock down this preload collar locking ring. Doesn't need to be very tight. Once that's set, we're ready to reestablish our clicker settings. We'll start with low speed compression. What we're doing here, we're going full stiff clockwise until we meet resistance. Once we've met resistance, we're going to back out counterclockwise, 1 click or 1 detent, and from there, that's our 0 point. We'll count out to our original clicker setting. Next, we'll move on to our rebound. Same thing. We'll go full stiff clockwise until we meet resistance. We'll go counterclockwise, 1 click or 1 detent, and we'll count out from there. Next, we can move on to our high-speed compression adjuster, which is using that 17mm combination wrench. We'll also go full stiff or full clockwise. Once we hit resistance, we're going to reference the dot that's laser marked on the edge of this adjuster hex, and we're going to use that to reference our final setting. Now that we've installed our Kreft Moto Centrifuge XL, we've increased oil volume by 18%. We're allowing the shock to run up to 25 degrees cooler, which is going to be more consistent. It's going to have less fade, less friction, and it's going to keep you out there running at your optimal performance level on your KTM EXC or XCW.